During Thomas Jefferson's presidency, the new nation of the United States of America expanded westward into Louisiana Purchase of 1803, where approximately 828 million square miles of territory from the France was purchased by the United States, stretching from the Mississippi River in the east to the Rocky Mountains in the west, and from the Gulf of Mexico in the south to the Canadian border in the north. Along with the expansion came this question of slavery, and in an attempt to address such an issue, Congress formulated the Missouri Compromise, which stated that slavery would be allowed in Missouri but in no other state north of the 36th latitude line. Also, Maine would enter the Union as a free state, in order to sway from upsetting the balance between slave and free states in the nation. Thomas Jefferson, as the third president of the United States, a spokesman for democracy, and the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, was unavoidably involved in the Missouri debate. On April 22, 1820, from his retired home in Monticello, Thomas Jefferson sent a letter to John Holmes, a representative from Massachusetts until 1820, later to be a senator for the newly formed Maine, and more importantly, a designer of the Missouri Compromise, addressing Holmes' pamphlet to the citizens of Maine. Jefferson opens his letter to Holmes with the utmost of praise. He says, "I thank you, dear sir, for the copy you have been so kind as to send me of the letter to your constituents on the Missouri question. It is a perfect justification to them. I had for a long time ceased to read the newspapers or pay any attention to public affairs, confident they were in good hands, and content to be a passenger in our bark to the shore from which I am not distant." Jefferson acknowledges Holmes' attitude towards the compromise regarding pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups in the U.S. Congress. To begin his rhetorically filled letter, Jefferson starts on respectful terms with Holmes in order to quickly excoriate the compromise as an existential threat to the Union. However, before doing so, he creates a sense of direction in which he would continue in his argument. He directs his attention to the trust he has in any public affairs, and with his next few lines, he obliterated any approving sense he indices in the current predicament. He says, "But this momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once as the knell of the Union. It is hushed indeed for the moment, but this is a reprieve only, not a final sentence. A geographical line, coinciding with the marked principle, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated, and every new irritation will mark it deeper and deeper. I can say with conscious truth that there is not a man on earth who would sacrifice more than I would to relieve us from this heavy reproach in any practicable way. The cession of that kind of property, for so it is misnamed, is a bagatelle which would not cost me in a second thought, if that way a general emancipation and expatriation cannot be effected, and gradually and with due sacrifices, I think it might be. But as it is, we have the wolf by the ear, and we cannot neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice in one scale and self-preservation in the other." Jefferson begins to describe his reaction with sensory details as he described a fire bell in the night, which, as he listened in anguish, began to sound more like the death knell of the Union. Jefferson, like many others, fully understood the fragility of the Republic government. Jefferson reflected on his dissatisfaction with the compromise, including the factor that it drew a very little line through the Union, strictly dividing the free and slave states, in which Jefferson identified as coinciding with the marked principle, moral and political, rather than just a mere political division. Jefferson saw that with the inerasable decision, the newly fangled republic held the wolf by the ears, in which the fight over slavery could no longer be contained. Additionally, Jefferson argues that slavery should not be restricted in the new states, as he continues, "Of one thing I am certain, that as a passage of slaves from one state to another would not make a slave of a single human being who would not be so without it, so their diffusion over a greater surface would make them individually happier and proportionally facilitate the accomplishment of their emancipation, by dividing the burden on a greater number of coadjutors. And abstinence, too, from this active power would remove the jealousy excited by the undertaking of Congress, to regulate the condition of the different descriptions of men composing a state. There certainly is an exclusive right of every state, with nothing in the Constitution has taken from them and given to the general government. Could Congress, for example, say that the non-freemen of Connecticut shall be freemen, or that they shall not immigrate into any other state. Jefferson voiced his belief that by allowing slavery to expand in the new states, the slaves would be individually happier, and thus ease the inevitable emancipation process. Even so, the population of slaves continued to grow from 1790 to 1820, from 697,897 to 1,538,038, a whopping 840,141 increase. Despite the restriction on the importation of the new slaves, in which he ensured the slaves would depart the United States as soon as they received their freedom. In continuation, Jefferson addressed his stance on which part of the government assumed the authority to address the issue of slavery, as he contended that it was the right of every state separately, not Congress's right. Furthermore, Jefferson begins to conclude his letter by invoking a sense of emotion or appealing to pathos as he admits he is close to the end of his life. He says, "I regret that I am now to die in the belief that the useless sacrifice of themselves by the generation of 1776 to acquire self-government and happiness to their country is to be thrown away by the unwise and the unworthy passions of their sons, and that my only consolation is to be that I live not to weep over it. If they would but dispassionately weigh the blessings they will throw away against an abstract principle more likely to be affected by union than by scission, they would pause before they would perpetrate this act of suicide on themselves and of treason against the hopes of the world. To yourself, as a faithful advocate of the Union, I tender the offering of my high esteem and respect. T.H. Jefferson." Jefferson identified the useless sacrifice of the generation of 1776 as pitiful and unworthy for him to weep over it. Jefferson's use of ethos, or appeal to authority, as he promoted his high esteem and respect in order to gain the credibility to have such opinions presented in his letter. While Thomas Jefferson called the Missouri controversy a fireball in the night, John Quincy Adams similarly stated it as a title page to a great tragic volume. The significance of the Missouri Compromise was not immediate. The political parties' reactions created neither realignment between the North and South, nor resurgence of federalism, a contemporary problem of the time. While the compromise set specific limits to the expansion of slavery, it also placed a reasonable amount of Western territories at the disposal of the slaveholding population. The compromise remained in effect for 34 years, in which its repeal in 1854 contributed to the domino effect of the Civil War.